China's foray into mobile communications began with disparate systems introduced from abroad, the AMP standard from the US and NMT from Sweden. In 1987, the Ministry of Post and Telecommunications moved to unify the country's analog cellular networks by adopting the Total Access Communication System standard, an analog mobile technology originally developed in the United Kingdom. The national network was built around two parallel infrastructures, the A network, which utilized equipment from Motorola, and the B network, which relied on Ericsson's equipment. Beijing was the first to introduce the tax service in 1986 using Motorola equipment, but it had restrictions. The following year, in late 1987, the first commercially launched tax system went live in Guangdong province, this time with equipment from Ericsson, serving an initial 700 users and timed to coincide with the 6th national games. Adoption rates were low, restricted to affluent elite due to the prohibitively expensive handsets and service fees. Coverage was sparse, and users frequently encountered poor voice quality and dropped calls. By 1991, there were only around 20,000 subscribers, reflecting its status as a luxury commodity rather than a utility. In 1993, China made a significant leap into the digital age by adopting 2G GSM, which brought about SMS and MMS messaging, along with encrypted voice calls. At first, foreign companies like Ericsson and Nokia held a strong grip of the market, capturing about 80% of the infrastructure and handsets. The Nokia 3210 became a popular choice among users. However, the scene changed as local companies like Huawei and ZTE entered the fray. By the year 2000, they had claimed 20% of market share, primarily by providing affordable equipment. This period saw a surge in mobile phone users, with prepaid plans making devices more accessible and SMS messaging gaining immense popularity. The number of subscribers skyrocketed from just around 2.3 million in 1997 to an astounding 145 million by 2001. Although rural coverage improved, users still face challenges with data services when trying to access multimedia content. In China, early mobile phones were extraordinarily expensive, often costing more than an average worker's annual salary. As a result, they became powerful markers of economic and social status. In the context of China's reform era, the mobile phone became a visible sign of participation in the new market economy. It symbolized access to social networks that were unavailable to most citizens. The early mobile phone emerged alongside China's massive urban transformation. Cities such as Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Shanghai, and Beijing became hubs of economic activity, and mobile phones played a key role in enabling new forms of mobility. It supported the rise of mobile professions like traders, drivers, brokers, and small business owners. The iconic image of the 90s Chinese businessman holding a large Big Brother mobile phone captured this cultural moment. In a rapidly changing economy where formal institutions were still developing, the ability to maintain and mobilize personal networks was crucial, and the mobile phone became a tool for strengthening Guangxi, reinforcing its role as a form of social capital. Early mobile phone use in China often took place in the public, and loud conversations became a recognizable feature of urban life. Unlike in Western Europe, speaking loudly on mobile phones was not a breach of etiquette, it was a performance of status. Being seen and heard using a mobile phone signals success and modernity. Over time, as mobile phones became more common, this performative aspect diminished. Chinese media portrayed early mobile phones with a mix of admiration and critique. On one hand, they were celebrated as symbols of modernization and economic progress. On the other, they were associated with corruption and official privilege, ostentatious displays of wealth, the excess of the new rich, and the anxiety about the widening social inequality. These narratives reflected the broader cultural tensions about reform, modernization, and the rapid emergence of new social classes after communism. The first stirrings of a Chinese challenge in global telecoms emerged during the 3G era, when Beijing made the pivotal decision to develop and mandate its own domestic standard. TD-SCDMA was assigned exclusively to China Mobile, the country's largest operator, forcing it to shoulder the burden of commercializing a technology that no other operator in the world adopted. For China Mobile subscribers, this meant limited handset choices and inferior international roaming compared to users on globally dominant standards. When China launched its first 3G networks in 2009, the landscape reflected this technological fragmentation. China Mobile deployed TD-SCDMA developed jointly by Datang Telekom and Siemens, while China Unicom adopted the global WCDMA standard and China Telecom deployed CDMA 2000. Despite the challenges of managing three incompatible technologies, the 3G rollout brought transformative capabilities to Chinese consumers, with video calls, mobile television, and the early days of internet browsing. The adoption of 3G proved remarkably rapid, with 85 million new subscribers added within just 3 years, growth driven largely by the arrival of 3G smartphones like the iPhone 3G. By 2012, 3G penetration had reached 20%, and the surging data consumption was fueling newly introduced mobile app ecosystems. TD-SCDMA's technical immaturity created persistent coverage gaps, while high device costs slowed adoption in rural areas. For China Mobile, the burden of nurturing a unique standard with limited global support proved costly in market share terms. The operator lost ground to rivals with access to mainstream device options. However, this apparent disadvantage contained the seeds of future dominance. By operating a standard entirely their own, domestic equipment vendors, principally Huawei and ZTE, gain invaluable experience developing and deploying complete network systems at scale, insulated from direct competition with dominant foreign vendors. They learn to solve integration problems, optimize performance, and manage nationwide rollouts under conditions that would have been impossible in open competition. When the time came for 4G, these lessons would prove transformative, positioning Chinese manufacturers to leverage their hard-won expertise on the global stage. The transition to 4G marked the inflection point where Chinese manufacturers began their dramatic rise. Crucially, the 4G standard adopted OFDM technology, which supported both China's time division mode and the frequency division mode used globally. This technical convergence meant that, for the first time, chipset makers like Qualcomm and MediaTek could produce single chipsets supporting both modes, instantly eliminating China Mobile's handset disadvantage from the 3G era. China introduced 4G technology in 2013, adopting the TD-LTE standard, a globally recognized specification co-developed with China Mobile. The timing proved strategic. China Mobile received its 4G license in 2013, a full year ahead of competitors China Unicom and China Telecom. The company moved with breathtaking speed, building approximately 720,000 4G base stations within its first year of operation. By 2016, China's total 4G base stations count had surged to 3.2 million, creating the world's largest and most densely deployed 4G infrastructure. For domestic equipment vendors, this explosive build-out brought unprecedented opportunities. The scale of deployment allowed these manufacturers to achieve economies of scale that no Western competitor could match, amortizing research and development costs across millions of units while continuously refining technology through real-world deployments. Huawei captured approximately 30% of the global 4G infrastructure market, while ZTE established itself as a major force. Subscriber numbers skyrocketed, jumping from 97 million in 2014 to approximately 1.03 billion by 2018, with 4G networks carrying 90% of mobile traffic. The new data speeds enabled the rise of super apps like WeChat and Alibaba's ecosystem, fundamentally reshaping China's digital economy. The arrival of 5G in the late 2010s allowed China to penetrate the market. Companies in the West did not take the threat seriously, thinking Chinese companies were only good for low-cost manufacturing. Experimental 5G networks began to appear in the United States, Canada, South Korea, Japan, and a number of European countries in 2018. The Western telecoms industry met 5G with mixed feelings, desperately trying to convince themselves of killer use cases like virtual reality while fearing for the amounts of returns they would make after heavy investments to buy spectrum licenses and base stations. China went all in and invested massive amounts into building 5G telecoms infrastructure all over the country. The state provided significant assistance to the likes of Huawei, ZTE, and FiberHome by introducing large-scale Made-in-China program. It also supported them internationally through the Digital Silk Road State Project, a telecoms program under the Belt and Road Initiative, helping them make inroads in Africa, South America, and parts of Asia. This investment in infrastructure gave the local telecoms equipment companies a huge market to sell their product and strengthen their balance sheets, making them ready to go out into the world to fight for market share. Because of their cheaper labor cost and larger scales of production, they were able to undercut the likes of Nokia, Ericsson in price, gaining market share in Africa, South America, and even Western markets. But this was about to cause some concerns. Some Western capitals started to become concerned that their telecoms equipment systems were controlled by Chinese companies affiliated to the communist government and could be forced by the Chinese government to implement backdoors for spying or even shut down telecom systems in case of a war with China. On December 2018, at the request of the United States government, Canada arrested Meng Wanzhou, the chief financial officer of Chinese tech giant Huawei, in Vancouver, Canada. The US sought her extradition on charges related to alleged violations of sanctions against Iran, accusing her of fraud and misleading the banks. Her arrest severely strained relations between China and both Canada and the US. In what many viewed as a retaliation, China detained two Canadian citizens, Michael Kovic and Michael Spivak, shortly after Meng's arrest. The diplomatic standoff lasted nearly 3 years, ending in September 2021 when Meng reached a deferred prosecution agreement with the United States and was allowed to return to China. Almost simultaneously, the two Canadians were released, marking the end of this geopolitical saga. Before the US imposed sanctions, more than 70% of the semiconductors in Huawei's base stations came from Western suppliers. The key components of Huawei's base stations included memory from Samsung Electronics, storage from Cypress Semiconductor, field programmable gate arrays from Lattice Semiconductor, power control chips from Texas Instruments, and circuit protection from TDK of Japan. However, this changed dramatically. By 2019, American components made up only 27%, while 48% was manufactured in China. By 2021, the percentage of components sourced from the United States in Huawei's small base stations had plummeted to under 1%, with around 90% of the components being made in China. However, semiconductor access remains a vulnerability as SMIC's chip fabrication struggles to reach nodes lower than 7 nanometers, potentially forcing Huawei to use less efficient chips for future deployments. Huawei now relies on in-house development for core 5G chips through a semiconductor subsidiary, HiSilicon, while strategically partnering with Chinese suppliers to circumvent US sanctions. For RF power amplifiers, HiSilicon designs gallium nitride-based chips mass-produced by Xiamen Sanan Integrated Circuits, achieving over 50% power efficiency. For baseband processors, they use HiSilicon's 7nm Tiangang and Balong chipsets. Huawei's baseband chips are primarily manufactured by SMIC, China's largest foundry. It produces Huawei's Kirin system-on-chip CPUs using its 7nm process node. HiSilicon's Tiangang chipset powers their radio units, handling signal processing, beamforming, and spectral management. It contains chips like HI5562 to handle signal modulation, massive MIMO, and millimeter wave communications. The unit also produces chips for routers, IoT devices, and automotive modules. Huawei's radio frequency filters are primarily supplied by Maxent Microelectronics for surface acoustic wave filters and Psy Microelectronics for bulk acoustic wave filters, with R&D support from its Munich center. Their MIMO antennas are fully designed in-house, featuring innovations like Blade AAU Pro, combining active and passive antennas and ultra-wideband modules, leveraging metamaterial arrays for compact designs and 5 times capacity gains. Nowadays, about half the market for 5G equipment in the world belongs to the Chinese. According to a 2023 review by analytical company Omdia, almost 31% of the global market for mobile base stations belongs to Huawei. In second place is Swedish Ericsson with 24%, then followed by Finnish Nokia at 19%. China's ZTE comes in at 4th place, then Korea's Samsung with 6%. Huawei serves 59% of the Chinese market, making it responsible for more than 1.8 million sites. And this is despite the fact that United States and a number of other countries, Great Britain, Australia, Canada, Sweden, Japan, etc., at the behest of the White House, abandoned 5G infrastructure based on Huawei equipment. 6 years of US sanctions against Huawei could not interrupt its rise to leadership in the telecoms gear market. ZTE is China's second largest telecoms vendor and holds about 11% global market share, specializing in cost-effective 4G, 5G infrastructure and smartphones. But unlike Huawei, ZTE avoided prolonged US sanctions after a 2018 settlement for violating Iran-North Korea trade bans, allowing it to retain access to critical US components like Qualcomm chips. The company benefited from Huawei's setbacks, gaining contracts in Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, where affordability outweighs security concerns. In the Middle East, the company partnered with operators like STC of Saudi Arabia and Etisalat of UAE for 5G trials to enter the market. ZTE's focus on Open RAN and AI-driven networks has helped it compete in mid-tier markets, though it lags Huawei in innovation. ZTE provides a comprehensive range of base stations for both traditional and modern network deployment, supporting 4G LTE and 5G technologies. Its CXSDR base stations are designed for 5G networks supporting high-bandwidth applications, whilst the Q cells provide 4G LTE and 5G coverage in buildings, stadiums, and large public venues. The company follows a vertically integrated 5G strategy, designing its own base station processors like the ZXXDR B8300 that supports 2G, 5G multimode, cloud-native virtualization, Open RAN compliance, and up to 400 gigabits per second switching capacity. It also develops in-house massive MIMO antennas and niche outdoor and marine models co-produced with partners like Ponyington. For the RF front end, ZTE combines in-house design with external expertise. Its radio frequency power amplifiers use gallium nitride chips from Qorvo, Cree, and analog devices, optimized with ZTE's digital pre-distortion technology to reach higher than 50% efficiency. Its RF filters are sourced from Murata and Skyworks. Huawei's arch-rival ZTE cannot use Huawei silicon for its own base station product, but can leverage international vendors because it has less embargoes placed on it. As a result, Intel emerged as a key supplier. For Cloud RAN infrastructure, ZTE developed the Neo acceleration chip, an accelerator card that offloads virtualization, hypervisor management, and network control from servers. It employs TSMC's 7nm process for these processors. Earlier generations of ZTE base stations relied totally on a mix of off-the-shelf components. The new hybrid approach allows ZTE to balance innovation, cost, and performance. The company reinvests 10% of its annual revenue into R&D to refine this model, recently demonstrating advanced integrations like dual-band 5G carrier aggregation. Today, ZTE is the fourth largest equipment provider, only behind Huawei, Ericsson, and Nokia. While less scrutinized than Huawei, ZTE faces similar international challenges, US export controls, and competition from Open RAN alternatives. FiberHome Technologies is the third largest of the Chinese major telecoms equipment companies. It traces its origin to the Wuhan Research Institute of Posts and Telecommunications, established in 1974. True to its name, FiberHome is a leader in optical technology, holding a dominant 15% share of China's domestic fiber optic cable market and ranking among the world's top 5 manufacturers. In the 5G arena, FiberHome has positioned itself as a key player, deploying over 150,000 4G and 5G base stations across more than 30 countries. Internationally, it has faced challenges such as being added to the US entity list in 2020 over geopolitical concerns, yet continues to expand in regions like Asia, South America, and Africa, driven by demand for cheaper telecoms infrastructure. Beyond the major players, other Chinese manufacturers serve niche markets. These include Datang Telekom, which provides base stations for critical infrastructure like nuclear plants, Hytera, which focuses on solutions for small towns and villages, and Comba Telecom, which serves the enterprise and campus network sector. However, these companies remain smaller players with limited international recognition. China has the biggest base station market in the world. In fact, its total base station deployment is larger than that of the other top 10 markets combined. This immense domestic footprint provides a big advantage for its telecoms gear manufacturers, offering them a substantial and stable market in which to develop economies of scale. With production efficiencies ramped up for its huge market, these manufacturers can then export their products at highly competitive prices, further strengthening their global position. However, the size of China's infrastructure and its status as the nation with the largest number of connected devices does not translate to the most lucrative market for its operators. That distinction belongs to the United States. While Chinese operators manage an enormous subscriber base, the American counterpart can charge customers significantly higher data rates, ultimately capturing greater revenues and profitability from a smaller user pool. The main system at a cell site is the baseband unit. The baseband unit serves as a computational and control heart of a cellular base station. Its primary function is to act as a critical interface between the radio equipment at the cell site and the core network. It does this by converting analog radio signals received from the mobile phone into digital data, which is then further processed by its digital signal processors to extract the transmitted information. Once processed, this data is then handed off to the core network, which acts as a central nervous system. The core network then routes the data to its ultimate endpoint, which could be another mobile phone on the network, a data center providing internet service, or an international fiber optic backbone for overseas communication. A modern 5G base station is made of three functional subsystems: the radio unit, the distributed unit, and the centralized unit. The radio unit is responsible for directly controlling the antenna to create focused beams directed at each user's device rather than broadcasting aimlessly in all directions. Its primary function is to capture analog radio waves from the antenna and convert them into digital data that can be transmitted deeper into the system for further processing. To accomplish this, the radio unit contains several specialized components working in concert. Microcontrollers manage the antenna beams, directing their shape and orientation. Digital to analog converters translate the analog antenna signals into digital data. Field programmable gate arrays perform the beam forming calculations, execute data manipulation algorithms, and handle data error correction. Finally, application-specific integrated circuits accelerate mathematically intensive tasks like frequency translation, filtering, and manipulating the data signal to improve power amplification efficiency. The distributed unit performs real-time baseband processing tasks that cannot tolerate the latency of the centralized unit. Its primary responsibility is to determine how beams should be formed and updated, calculating optical beamforming weights by analyzing uplink channel estimates from user devices. Beyond beamforming, the distributed unit handles complex algorithms that encode and decode digital signals, corrects errors introduced during radio transmission, and performs the modulation that converts data into a format suitable for transmission. To accomplish these tasks, its architecture centers on high-performance server CPUs, which are paired with FPGAs or ASICs to accelerate those computationally intensive workloads. While FPGAs are less power efficient than ASICs, requiring about 8 times more energy to deliver the same performance, they remain dominant in 5G base stations because the industry has not yet reached the point where software-defined processing can fully penetrate to the hardware edge. ASICs offer superior efficiency once standards are frozen and production volumes justify their enormous development costs. But 5G technology continues to evolve with technical uncertainties around massive MIMO, Cloud RAN, and new architectures. FPGAs provide the essential flexibility to adapt to these evolving standards, support frequent algorithm updates that enable field reconfiguration without costly chip redesigns. These include beamforming algorithms that must adjust in real time to user movements, channel coding techniques like LDPC that update with new 3GPP releases, and front-haul protocols that shift as Open RAN specifications mature. Their reconfigurability allows gear makers to update hardware in the field, fix bugs, and support new features without redesigning chips, making them ideal for the parts of the base station where the rules are still being rewritten. Until 5G specifications stabilize completely and software-defined networking can match hardware-level performance, gear makers will continue relying on FPGAs for their flexibility. A centralized unit, by contrast, handles non-real-time functions and higher-layer protocols. Its responsibilities include connection management, mobility, quality of service flow handling, data encapsulation, and security. The centralized unit runs on commercial off-the-shelf servers equipped with standard x86 processors from Intel or AMD, reflecting its software-driven architecture. Historically, Chinese telecoms giant Huawei, ZTE, and FiberHome shared the same global supply chain as their Western rivals Nokia and Ericsson, sourcing critical components like FPGA from Xilinx and Intel, data converters from analog devices, and filters from Murata and Qorvo. However, US export restrictions forced a strategic pivot, compelling these companies to aggressively develop and qualify domestic suppliers to fill the gaps, while still utilizing any accessible Western components. This spurred the rapid growth of the Chinese domestic semiconductor industry. In the crucial FPGA sector, companies have turned to local makers like Gowin Semiconductor, Fudan Microelectronics, and Shanghai and Logic Infotech. But while a technological gap persists, these Chinese FPGA have largely caught up in speed and density and are now being used in applications where performance tolerances allow. A similar shift is underway for high-speed data converters, where traditional leaders, Analog Devices, and Texas Instruments are being replaced by local firms like New Radiotech and Fudan Microelectronics. This transition is a key part of China's broader state-backed initiative to build a self-reliant mixed-signal integrated circuit ecosystem. The development of gallium nitride power amplifiers for 5G radios reveals a complex history of technological leadership and shifting market dynamics. Even though gallium nitride amplifiers were developed in the West, Huawei pioneered its use when most Western manufacturers were still using older silicon-based LDMOS, which produced less efficient power amplifiers and heavier 5G radios. Huawei sourced gallium nitride amplifiers from Sumitomo Electric of Japan. This gave them a significant early advantage. Western component suppliers like Qorvo, Wolfspeed, and Macom faced delays in commercializing their GaN solutions. At the time, the only Western commercial GaN amplifier was from NXP, but NXP struggled to ramp up its production, finally opening its Arizona gallium nitride fab in late 2020. China has also been aggressively cultivating its own domestic RF supply chain led by the likes of Innoscience, CETC, and Dynax Semiconductor. The country now boasts a growing list of RF transmitter chip suppliers, including Unisoc, Z-Link, Novaco, Swin, and several others. In compute processing, Huawei holds a unique position with its internal CPU design arm, HiSilicon. Its rivals ZTE and FiberHome currently rely on a mix of Intel processors but are actively testing domestic CPUs from Chinese designers like Haigon, Xiaoxin, and Longshan to reduce future risks. For intensive computations required by AI and advanced networking, NVIDIA remains the global performance benchmark. However, the Chinese are fostering local champions, with companies like Cambricon and BaronTech developing indigenous AI accelerators as somewhat competitive substitutes. The market for filters, vital components for signal clarity, has long been dominated by Japanese and American giants like Murata, TDK, and Qorvo. While these firms lead in surface acoustic wave and bulk acoustic wave technologies, Chinese suppliers like Psy Electronics and Ultra Trend Technologies are scaling up production to serve local gear makers. Finally, for high-speed network interface cards, the strategies vary. Huawei leverages its own internal NIC products through its server division, but still integrates top-tier cards from NVIDIA and Broadcom where needed. Similarly, ZTE and FiberHome source from Intel, Broadcom, and NVIDIA for high-performance needs, but have begun adopting domestic replacements from suppliers like IOI Technologies, Shenzhen Mui, and LR Link to build a more self-sufficient supply chain. The architecture of base stations has evolved significantly, leading to three main deployment models, each suited to different network requirements. These are integrated baseband units, distributed baseband units, and cloud baseband units. In standard 4G LTE networks, the prevalent design was the integrated baseband unit. This was a self-contained unit where all processing functions, radio transmission, baseband processing, and network control were housed within a single physical enclosure. While this all-in-one approach simplified installation and was effective for its time, it lacked flexibility. In this traditional radio access design, each base station operated autonomously, with both control plane and user plane functions located at cell sites. This prevented base stations from coordinating with each other, leading to potential interference and less efficient network performance. The transition to 5G addressed these limitations by introducing a disaggregated architecture. This model splits the traditional base station into three distinct subsystems. The radio unit, which handles the transmission and reception of wireless signals with activities like RF amplification, RF filtering, and analog-to-digital conversion. The distributed unit, which manages real-time physical layer baseband processing with activities like forward error correction, modulation and demodulation, and scheduling of radio resources. And the centralized unit, which handles non-real-time higher layer network control activities like connection management, mobility handling, and data routing to the core network. This separation, centralizing control from a single location, allows telecom operators to manage multiple base stations simultaneously. This enables advanced features like coordinated transmission and dynamic resource allocation, which minimizes interference and greatly improves overall network efficiency. But the most advanced evolution is the cloud baseband unit, which is part of the virtualized RAN architecture. In this model, the baseband processing functions are virtualized and run as software on standard cloud servers. This approach offers superior scalability, flexibility, and cost-effectiveness as processing resources are dynamically allocated and managed from a centralized data center rather than being tied to a physical hardware at each cell site. The architectural evolution from integrated to disaggregated cloud-based baseband unit represents a fundamental transition from hardware-defined to software-driven networks, a prerequisite for advanced 5G and future 6G capabilities. This paradigm shift could reconfigure the global telecommunications supply chain. By promoting open interfaces and decoupling hardware from software, it creates opportunities for new entrants and threatens to dismantle European and Chinese telecoms gear dominance by eliminating the advantages of vertically integrated stacks. In virtualized RAN networks, the centralized unit and distributed unit are collapsed into software running on edge data centers. By virtualizing baseband functions, these technologies remove the necessity for proprietary hardware, an area where current incumbents thrive. Instead, only commoditized radio units will remain a physical component, transforming base station sites into smart antenna stations. This shift democratizes the market, enabling software solution players like Mavenir, Rakuten Symphony, or specialized radio unit manufacturers like JMA Wireless to compete purely on cost and efficiency without deep expertise in systems integration. Simultaneously, 6G's AI-driven demands will prioritize software innovation over hardware. Here, Western cloud giants like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google will gain an edge, leveraging GPU-accelerated edge computing and AI orchestration tools. Sanction-constrained Chinese firms lacking access to advanced AI chips will face hurdles in scaling their virtualized software-centric networks. While the Chinese companies will most likely counter with state-backed edge cloud initiatives and aggressive radio unit pricing, the combined force of cloud vRAN, edge virtualization, and 6G software demands could redistribute power. But Open RAN standards will allow new entrants, probably Chinese, Indian, and Vietnamese, to seize the radio unit commoditization wave, while American companies will likely dominate the high-value software layer, potentially fracturing the current integrated gear monopolies. Okay, that's it, folks. Please like and subscribe, and stay tuned.